Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's debate, Is Morality God-Given? Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank especially the Ratio Christi group at Georgia Tech and the Campus Freethinkers for putting this event on and for all the time and hard work today and everyone else, video crews and so forth, that put into making this event happen. Something that everybody says at the beginning here, turn your cell phones off. Someone's always goes off, don't be that guy. Our moderator for this evening is David Sharp, president of the Campus Freethinkers. David is a second-year computer science major with special interest in Linux server management. His first passion, however, is philosophy and rational inquiry, and he has a special interest in Aristotle, David Hume, and John Locke. He's president of the Campus Freethinkers because he wants to make a place where other people like himself who have a passion for philosophy and free thought can come together and discuss and philosophize. Here's David.
What is morality? Where does it come from? What is needed to be moral? Is morality God-given? We ask these questions not merely as an intellectual exercise, but because they are directly relevant in our everyday lives. I'd like to give a brief introduction about the two organizations represented here today. Ratio Christi is a student apologetics alliance that aims to bring faith and reason together and establish the intellectual voice of Christ on campus. By situating apologetic clubs at universities nationally and internationally, Ratio Christi hopes to take part in the battle for the mind and begin to reverse the prevalent trend toward secularism in the university by encouraging dialogue and stimulating discussion towards answering life's pressing questions. The Georgia Tech chapter of Ratio Christi was started just this year, and its president and some founding members are on their panel today. The Ratio Christi panel will be representing the affirmative side of today's central question, is morality God-given? I'd like to briefly introduce the panel members. So guys, please give a small wave so the audience knows what I'm talking about. First, Peter Swanson. Peter has graduated with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and is affiliated with both Ratio Christi and Campus Freethinkers. Sam Shepard is currently studying genomics and has completed an internship with the university in bioinformatics. He is affiliated with Ratio Christi and has volunteered for Campus Crusade for Christ. Berkeley Grider, a fourth-year PhD candidate doing research in chemistry, biochemistry, and cancer biology. He's involved in both Ratio Christi and with the Veritas Forum. Finally, Asa Burke is a first-year mechanical engineering major and is the founding president of Ratio Christi here at Georgia Tech. Campus Freethinkers is an organization dedicated to promoting the ideals of scientific and critical inquiry, secularism, and human-based ethics. It seeks to provide an open forum for the discussion of religious, moral, ethical, social, and philosophical issues. By doing so, Campus Freethinkers hopes to promote better understanding of both ourselves and our fellow students here at Georgia Tech. Though Campus Freethinkers is not a specifically atheist organization, it does try to promote awareness and understanding of non-theistic worldviews in a culture that at times seems biased towards religious belief. The Campus Freethinkers panel will be arguing the negative side of tonight's topic, is morality God-given? I'll introduce the Campus Freethinkers panel members. Again, please give a small wave. Dylan McKay, second year here at Tech, doing a double major in math and computer science. Adam Yost is a second year biochem major who will soon be switching to computer science, also a member of Campus Freethinkers. Joshua Jobe will be graduating this semester with a physics degree and will be attending the physics PhD program at the University of Southern California this fall. He has a special interest in quantum computing, is on the executive committee of Campus Freethinkers, and is also the president of the Georgia Tech Students of Objectivism. Finally, AJ Kolang, second-year computational media major. He was recently elected to the executive committee of Campus Freethinkers and is responsible for the club's web presence. Our format will be as follows. Each side will get 10 minutes to make an opening case. They'll then have 7 minutes for rebuttal, with a minute in between to confer amongst themselves and gather their thoughts. We'll have 20 minutes of alternating cross-examination, followed by 5 minutes for concluding statements. As a moderator, I'll try to guide things when it would be helpful or make things clearer, but I'm going to do my best to stay out of it and let the panelists speak for themselves. Then lastly, we will have 30 minutes, so it may go longer, for audience question and answer. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the podium over to the panel from Ratio Christi for their opening statement.
How's that sound? Good evening, everyone, and glad to see you guys here tonight. The question is, let me get my timer going. The question is morality God-given? And so, of course, the first thing you have to ask yourselves is, well, what is morality? How do we define what that is? Because if you don't have a handle on what morality is, then the question, is morality God-given has no meaning. Merriam-Webster defines morality as a doctrine or system of moral conduct. Morality is a system of rules, principles, truths, standards, or guidelines which are used to determine the difference between actions as right or wrong, good and evil. This is pretty basic, pretty standard. This isn't anything new, anything that we really have to define in great detail because we all experience this on a day-to-day basis. We all have the capacity to declare this is right or this is wrong, this is good or this is evil. So morality is very intrinsic, it's very self-apparent. So hence the debate tonight is not, does morality exist? Simply, is it God-given? Our claim is in the positive, yes, we believe with what we believe good reason that morality is God-given. And there are three main points. So capture this and then I'll go into them in more detail. First, there is such a thing as right and wrong, regardless of our opinion. Morality is objective. Two, atheism does not provide a basis of objective morality. And three, God provides a basis for objective morality. Pretty simple. So the first point, there is such a thing as right and wrong, regardless of our opinion. Morality is objective. Now this is where it gets a little dicey, right? Because there's all kinds of differing opinions on what is right and wrong. So who's to say that there's really some objective standard, right? But you have to stop and think, anytime you actually make a claim, if I say that's wrong to do that, or if you tell me something I do is wrong, you don't just mean it's wrong in your opinion. You mean it's wrong, period. You mean that it's wrong for me to do that, period. Whether or not I acknowledge that what I do is wrong, the statement means that it is objectively wrong for me to do it. So subjective morality is, each of us has our own different attempts at creating an objective moral framework for ourselves. So there is variability, but each of us recognizes that some things must be actually right, and some things must be actually wrong. We all have that, even though we may disagree in the details of what is right and what is wrong. Next, you have to think about this in terms of where did this come from? Morality is something that is human. It's part of who we are. It's not something that you can find in I'm a chemist. And I do chemistry all day long. There's no morality in biochemistry and in chemistry. I do it. Chemicals are not making moral judgments. They don't have that capacity. And so if we can make moral judgments, must be more than simply a bag of molecules and chemical reactions. Morality is something greater than it can be explained simply by mass and energy. Second point, atheism does not provide a basis for objective morality, and this is something that we don't really have to prove, I don't think, because most atheists actually agree with me on this point. We're not claiming that belief in God is needed to act in a moral way. Of course, you don't have to believe in God to be a moral person. But what we are saying is that atheism is a worldview. If God doesn't exist and we're just all a happy accident, then that doesn't account for morality. Most famous atheists will agree, have a long list of quotes anywhere from David Hume to Richard Dawkins and Nietzsche and all kinds of other people. One that I'm going to read is from an atheist ethicist, Richard Taylor, in his book Ethics, Faith, and Reason. He says this: "To say that something is wrong because it is forbidden by God is perfectly understandable to anyone who believes in a law-giving God. But to say something is wrong, even though no God exists to forbid it, this is not understandable. The concept of moral obligation is unintelligible apart from the idea of God. The words remain, but their meaning is gone. Their meaning is gone. Right? So, without God, you have to redefine morals into something else. Okay? You can't say that something is right or wrong. You can only say something is beneficial or pleasurable, or that it causes me personal suffering and I don't like it, or that it is detrimental to the growth of our species, or whatever. You can make those kinds of statements, but those are not moral statements. And to try to build a morality on those kinds of realities is the classic is-ought problem that David Hume, atheist, presents us with. You cannot derive what should be from what is. You cannot look at those kinds of things. In other words, if I'm playing a game of chess, I can tell you that there might be certain moves that would be right if the goal is to win the chess game. That doesn't make it morally right. Well, maybe I'm playing against my wife, and if I beat her every time, that's not necessarily the moral thing to do. Maybe it would be the loving thing to do to let her win every now and then. So even though it's the right move in order to win, that doesn't make it morally right necessarily. There's lots of other anecdotal examples we could give along these lines. In a purely naturalistic worldview, there is no basis, or there's no objective standard for calling anything moral, and therefore you can't really use the terminology of morality. It's a misuse. You should use other terminology. You shouldn't use terminology of morals, or right and wrong. Beneficial or not beneficial are more appropriate. I'm going to skip this last point, and before we get on to how God provides a basis, let me just say this. If you redefine morality or get rid of it, or if there is no morality, and everyone makes up their own morality, this ends up with a huge mess. And there are lots of examples. I'll give you one. It might be beneficial to our species to prevent people with physical deformity from having children. This is actually something that was advocated even in the U.S., not just in Nazi Germany. It was advocated here, or earlier in the last century, that we prevent people with mental handicaps or physical deformities from having children. Well, the thought is, of course, that will help our species overall. But does that make it right? Does that make it morally right to do that just because it has, overarching benefits? I would say no, it doesn't make it right. Third, God provides a basis for objective morality. This is really self-evident. I don't need to prove this point, that if there is a God and he does define what is right and wrong, then that does give you a basis for objective morality. So that if I think something is right and you think something different is right, and we fight about it, well, there is actually a higher authority to go to say what is really right and what is really wrong. Right? So there is something objective outside of us in God who tells us what is really right and what is really wrong. Now, those are our three main points. There is such a thing as right and wrong, regardless of our opinion. Morality is objective. Atheism does not provide a basis for objective morality. God does provide a basis for objective morality. So our conclusion, morality is God-given. Now, that's our argument. Now, I want to have a little bit of an aside, because while our argument doesn't invoke Christianity, we are Christians. And so I want to at least tell you what we believe about these things. First, we believe that we are moral beings because we are made in God's image. We believe that I have the capacity to make moral judgments because God is a moral being who created a universe that we all live in where there are moral realities. And that is where it comes from. And things like love. Love exists because God, for all of eternity, was a loving God. That God loved God the Father, loved God the Son, loved God the Holy Spirit. That there's an eternal love within the triune Godhead. And that is the basis for personhood and for love. And that is where it comes from. And that is why we have it embedded in our very being. Same goes with morality. Next, the Bible gives a clear explanation not only of where this morality comes from, but why it's such a mess. The essence of sin, many will say, is that you harm your neighbor, that's sin. But actually, biblically speaking, the basis, the source of sin is not harming other people. It's dethroning God. It's saying to God, God, I don't like your standards. I'm going to make my own. That's the essence. And so from there you get chaos, moral chaos, because everyone wants to come up with their own standard. And those standards conflict. That's where wars come from. Two different people, two different groups of people having ideas that conflict about what's right. We don't have the power or the authority to actually define what is right and wrong. Lastly, Christians do not live up to God's standards. I'm just trying to say that because we aren't lifting ourselves up as the moral authority or the moral example of what, we're in the same boat as everybody else. We struggle. We are not perfect. We are not trying to hold ourselves up as arrogant Pharisees telling you guys what's right and wrong. That's not the point of this debate. All Christians acknowledge that we deeply, deeply need and require God's help in order to actually be moral. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Galatians 5. Thank you.
You guys hear this? That work? Cool. Probably not going to need it. Ladies, gentlemen, comrades, friends, brothers, sisters, thank you for coming. We have before us tonight the question, is morality God-given? Now obviously our answer is a resounding no, because we're all atheists. However, tonight we will set aside that issue to some degree. Does morality, as humans understand it, come from God? Since the dawn of man, we have struggled to survive against the elements, nature, and each other. When civilization began, it became evident that an agreed-upon standard of behavior was necessary to ensure that all members of the community flourished to their full potential. Those who broke the agreements of the societal contract were quickly outnumbered by those who adhered to the contract. Therefore, morality is a tool of self-preservation. These ethical codes became refined into morals that encourage behavior that enabled people to flourish and discourage behavior resulting in human suffering. This common morality contains agreed-upon basics such as disallowing murder, theft, rape. Any proposed moral system needs to align with these basic moral beliefs that we all share, in the same way that a scientific theory must align with the evidence. That isn't to say that we won't need to amend or refine some of these beliefs in the face of philosophical and scientific reasoning. Indeed, that seems quite likely. But any sort of moral system which does violence to these beliefs at a fundamental level must be considered not only false, but also evil. Imagine, if you will, a world comprised entirely of rocks. Does that make sense to ask the question, what is right and wrong in such a world? Of course not. What would it mean? Something needs to be capable of experience or questions about morality to exist. We don't ask what is right and wrong for rocks or amoebas to do, nor do we ask what is right and wrong for apes or bears to do. We can see then that morality has to be a question about the subjective experience of conscious creatures. Specifically, we are concerned with animals capable of abstract reasoning. The only ones of which we know are human beings. If you can't reason, we can't hold you to a certain standard of morality. I think we can all agree on this. It is incontrovertible. We can say then that morality only applies to beings capable of reason and is ultimately bound up in the experience of conscious creatures. What then is the relationship between the experience of conscious creatures and morality? Imagine, as Sam Harris does in his book, The Moral Landscape, a world in which every single person is in the most excruciating agony and misery for as long as possible. We must surely agree that such a world would be bad. If you ask, why is that world bad, you've asked a very stupid question. The opposite of such would be a world in which everybody is in the purest form of pleasure and happiness. If somebody asks you, why do you like to be happy, you look at them as if they're either joking or insane. Life and happiness is, at least implicitly, the goal of pretty much everything humans do. People are often wrong about what will promote their life and happiness, but it is a rare person indeed who consciously desires to be thoroughly miserable without some sort of compensating reward later, like an eternity in heaven. Indeed, we would diagnose such people as mentally unstable. Our contention is that questions of good and evil are really questions about human flourishing. Good encourages flourishing, while even evil hinders it. We are better off living in a society that bans murder, rape, and theft. We obviously also see, as a way to define our moral system, that on our life view, our life is preferable to death, pleasure to pain, happiness to suffering. We see also that we should hold someone accountable for his actions, for this too supports human flourishing. I think it is rather clear that we can get, in broad outline, our common moral beliefs from our proposed framework. There is, of course, much work to be done in fleshing out this idea in a philosophically rigorous fashion, but I think that it's clear we are on the right track. By our human standard, what may we say then of God and his morality? Let us judge him by his actions. In the book of Exodus, we see Yahweh punish the Egyptians by visiting them with plagues, whose climax was the slaughter of all firstborns and people and animals in Egypt. I quote, "Pharaoh and all of his officials and all of the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead." NIV version, Exodus 12:29. If the human being slaughtered all the newborns in a country to make a name for himself and to make a political point, we would probably convict him of crimes against humanity, kill him, and remember him as one of the most evil denizens of this planet has ever had the misfortune to produce. And it gets just worse, because the Pharaoh, on several occasions, seems tempted to let the Israelites go. But God hardens his heart, as seen as examples in Exodus 10:20 and 11:10. So not only does God visit unspeakable suffering and devastation upon Egypt as punishment for holding the Israelite, he actively intervenes to ensure that the Pharaoh does not let the Israelites go. He punishes the Pharaoh and all of Egypt for what he forces the Pharaoh to do. This just compounds the evil of Yahweh in Exodus. I could go on, listing other examples of atrocities, such as the flood, or the stories of Joshua, Job, Sodom, and Gomorrah. But if God's atrocities don't stop in the Old Testament, God is, after all, an all-being and all-knowing, yet he seems to be indifferent to evil. Imagine, if you will, if two men broke into an apartment. They proceed to rape the woman on the second floor, while her roommates, hearing her screams, called the police. The police don't show up, so the woman calls the police a second time. Eventually, the men find the two women upstairs, and all three women are beaten, raped, and forced to perform sexual acts on one another at gunpoint for 14 hours. All while this first woman's 4-year-old child watches. Well, you don't have to imagine it, because it happened March 16, 1975 in Washington, D.C. How many times do you think those women must have called out, "God, please help me"? God saw them and heard their cries, and he ignored them. He could have intervened. He could have gotten the police to investigate. He could have killed the men or restrained them or given them a heart attack. But that never happened. God watched with indifference as those women were brutalized. And cases just as heinous are happening every minute right across the world. God watches it all, has the power to stop it, has the power to help, and chooses not to. Imagine if Superman were to hear a woman screaming help, and he were to stand there and watch as she is brutally raped. Would anyone say he was a good person? Would anyone sing his praises? Of course not. We would condemn him and treat him with contempt and hatred, as he would justly deserve. We certainly wouldn't say that this is all part of his plan. The annals of villainy are filled with men who viewed people as pawns, their suffering ignored so as to make way for a greater good, a paradise, the fulfillment of some dream of heaven. Bin Laden, Kim Jong-il, Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, Marx, and Robespierre are among their numbers. Men who commit or agitate for horrific atrocities in order to build their paradise, in order to conform to their plan. What is worse is that we are often told that God is mysterious and works in ways that we cannot comprehend. This is a cop-out, the equivalent of saying, well, I know it looks really bad, but I promise that even though it seems impossible, it'll all work out in the end. God inflicts all our pain and suffering upon us, or at the very least stands idly by as we inflict it upon each other, and therefore must be considered incredibly sadistic, disgustingly vicious, unimaginably capricious, and by any meaningful definition of the word, horrifically evil. It is inconceivable that all our pain and suffering is part of a plan which will make it all better in the end, that this suffering will be made up for. It is laughable to think that an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-intelligent creator of the universe can't come up with a plan that doesn't call for the slaughter of children, brutal rapes, and mass murder. What then about rooting morality in God's goodness, or the innate goodness of God's commands? If we are to retain our common moral intuitions, If we are to think of good and bad are all related to human flourishing and suffering, if we want to use the words good and bad in any manner which coheres with our usual meanings for those terms, we must reject the notion that God's innate goodness entirely. God isn't good. By our moral intuitions and by our proposed standards of human flourishing, Yahweh is a vicious monster. If we wish to say that God's commands are innately good, then we must defend all the pain and suffering that has ever been or ever will be as a necessary part of God's incomprehensible plan for us. We said at the beginning that any moral system must not violate our common moral intuitions for it to be taken seriously. Christianity does unspeakable violence to our moral intuitions, condoning the slaughter of children, the capricious infliction of suffering in service of vanity, and defending the pain and suffering of mankind by an appeal to an inscrutable plan. By any meaning definition of the word good, we must say that Christianity cannot possibly be a basis for a moral system, and that we must instead ground our morality in human flourishing as the goal of life.
All right. Well, as Adam just pointed out, I followed his points, and the first point that Adam makes is he starts to explain where morality came from. He starts to talk about how, it is a societal concept that our ancestors have developed. Now, this line of thinking would get me to believe that Adam believes that morality is just a cultural adaptation, that it has no objective bearing on reality. It's just relative to the culture that you're in. His second point, that it's for conscious creatures. I agree with that. I personally believe there is an objective morality, which confuses me when Adam gets to his third point. Adam's third point is that we can establish an objective morality if we imagine the worst possible world possible. It says, imagine that, human suffering was at its apex. We can all agree here that that no one wants this. Now, let's think about what Adam has done here. Adam has taken all of our subjective opinions of morality. No one wants that world. And he said, see, we all agree. Therefore, this is objective. Now, I would say that that the fact that all of us have this consistency is an indicator of objective morality. It leads us to say there has to be an objective morality, but it doesn't actually establish it. For a morality to actually be objective, it has to be outside of human thought. That is actually the definition of objective morality. It is independent of what you think or I think. Something is just wrong. For example, let's take the hypothetical situation that the Nazis win World War II, and we live in a world where killing Jews is actually morally right in culture's eyes. Now, if you and I were to come into this world, to step into this world, we would say, this is wrong. I don't care how many people believe this. It's just wrong. But without an objective foundation for morality, there is no basis to say that other than the culture itself. Now, I would challenge the members of the Freethinkers to really give us an objective foundation of morality besides just all of our subjective. Where can you establish it? You can't just say, as Sam Harris, and I'll continue what Sam Harris attempts to say. He says that, well, we can define how to make humans flourish. Therefore, that's good. But no, the science of how to promote flourishing is a fact, not a value. So in order to provide a ground for moral objectivity, you have to give an outside source from humanity that provides a value, not just a fact. For why should we promote human flourishing? Why? Because Adam says so? Because everyone in this room agrees? What if everyone in this room didn't agree? Would that still be right? And so I'll leave that point alone. Adam now discussed the problem of evil. And he made some pretty harsh accusations against the God of the Old Testament. Now, as a side, I find that a lot of these accusations come from people that read evilbible.com, or websites that just briefly give you a little snapshot into this culture, into this time. A lot of these questions really take sensitivity and understanding of the cultural context, and all sorts of different factors that tend to be ignored with these emotional outbursts. However, I'm not going to attempt to defend the God of the Old Testament, even though I do believe the God of the Old Testament is a moral God. The reason why is because that's not even the topic of tonight's debate. You know, the topic is, how can we establish morality ontologically? How can we establish what it is? Objective morality, that is. Not whether the God of the Old Testament is good in our subjective opinion. And so the problem of evil also falls into that boat too. It takes the assumption that there is a God. So if there is a God, how can we all agree with him subjectively? But that's still not the point. We are focusing on the foundation for moral objectivity. So I challenge the group, Freethinkers, to really provide a basis, which I do not think they have. Thank you.
So I want to start off talking about what we agree upon. As the Ratio Christi panel has said, they agree that we have these moral sentiments, right? These common things that we all believe are wrong, like murder and rape, for example. That they believe that those morals have come from God, whereas we believe that they are what promote human flourishing. So let's take Peter's example of if the Nazis won World War II, right? If this was the case and killing Jews was a good thing, that would obviously be a bad thing on the criteria of human flourishing. Therefore, we could say that they're doing evil. It's a fairly objective criteria. It's not outside of cultural relativism that he reports that we report, which we don't. One thing I would like to address is that Adam has in fact read the entire Bible cover to cover, not just evilbible.com. That's one thing. As far as the point of cultural relativism, I think you actually just applied that point in relation to God. That, oh, well, it was okay for God to kill the firstborn because he didn't understand the culture at the time. It's not good. Good or bad isn't defined by cultural standards. It's defined by objective moral standards. So it's never okay for God to kill children. It's never okay for anyone to kill children that are innocent children. It's not okay. So yeah, the idea that showing that God isn't moral is irrelevant to this discussion is absurd. We're discussing if morality is God-given. If God is immoral, how can he possibly give us our morals? If God condones these terrible things, he can't possibly, why would we listen to him? We know, we can tell from our sensibilities, just common sense, that killing children is bad, for example. So if God condones that, we have to say that he is not fitting the moral criteria that we have been given. Another thing that Peter said is that human experience can't derive these values, that you have to go outside of humanity to get these morals, which sounds like you're defining morality. Objective morality has to be given by God. Therefore, God gives objective morality. That's a rather subjective premise, and one I would refute, obviously. We can see through everything we know has come from our human experience. The fact that this podium is in front of me, that's my human experience. All of you will probably agree that this podium is in front of me. It's as subjective as we possibly can be. It's collective human experience and human thought is all we have to go off of. You can't say that oh, well, values have to come from outside of human experience, because how would we know that they were there? It's an absurd argument that in our system for morality, that things that promote human flourishing are good and things that do not are bad, is an objective criteria as far as anything that we know is objective, that can be applied to any situation to demonstrate whether something's good or bad. Whereas the morality of Christianity in particular has obviously shown that it's not in alignment with our personal beliefs as things like murder and rape being wrong. Likewise, I would challenge the Ratio Christi debaters to properly address the problem of evil, considering that if God is immoral, morality can't be God-given. I think that's all. Thank you.
We'll now take a total of 20 minutes for a cross-examination period. Each panel will take turns asking questions of the opposing panel. Brief follow-up questions based on that panel's answer are acceptable, but we're going to try to keep the questions moving. Ratio Christi panel, you have the first question.
It shouldn't be.
Not so close. Okay. Just a clarification. Are we treating subjective and objective as opposites here, in sort of a way?
I mean, they're fundamentally different.
They're different.
I don't know if I would say that they're opposite.
Sure. I would not think you would. Okay, so is it possible then that if we have an objective reality, that our subjective experiences inform us of that objective reality? Okay, so in your case, human flourishing, in our case, rooted in the nature and being of God. So that subjective experience can be distorted. It could be extended. It could be customized. But whether or not it adheres to it better or worse doesn't mean that that objective standard exists. So I guess we can both say that that exists, and whether or not we have these subjective experiences about something good or wrong, we can disagree about what it is and what it isn't. But the fact is, we're still both arguing for the same thing. Yeah.
Morality?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
So we have a question. Do your actions influence your place in an afterlife? Ergo, do good things help you attain a better place in an afterlife, and do doing bad things give you a worse place?
Could you clarify the relevance to the question at hand?
Really, it's about morality, right? So if doing good or bad things has no effect on the ultimate outcome of your life, we're just wondering why one would do good or bad things, I suppose.
So your question really is, why do good or why do bad?
Right.
So I think that the answer, why we do good or why we do bad, is going to be different for different people. Okay, I think that the rationale, the motivation for all humans is because we're born in sin, from the Christian perspective, which means that we inherently will do something that's morally good for reasons that are ultimately selfish. which lines up, I think, perfectly well with your belief. Is that fair? So that would be the motivation for, I think, most people. We do what we want, right? That's the motivation. Now, motivations for morality is a different question, right? Because doing what we want does not necessarily mean doing what's right. Okay? So I would say that the motivation for action is doing what we want for our own pleasure, for our own reasons. But doing what is moral requires something very different. And I would say that for us, for Christians, the reason why we do what is moral is because we want to please God, because we want to put a smile on His face, because we love what He loves, because He's actually changed us. He's actually given us the ability to desire what is right. And in fact, every Christian will tell you that there's a conflict of our own natures. We have two conflicting desires. Some that we were born with, pure selfishness that we all experience, and conflicting desires that are new in the Christian experience. And so that is essentially our answer. Is that fair? Is that clear?
So just to clarify your answer, so what you're saying is that the reason that you would want to be moral and do moral things is basically to please God, essentially. Like that's the reason why you would want to do moral things. I mean, obviously we agree all action has to be motivated. We're basically asking, what motivation does someone have to be a moral person? Right?
Yeah, we would say that for Christians, that is part of the answer. Also, simply because our desires are different. We desire to do what is right, whereas before we did not desire to do what was right. And so that it is a new nature now that we love to do what is right. And so that's part of the new motivation that I didn't have before I became a Christian, for instance. We could ask questions.
Yes. My question is still getting at the focus of the debate, which is how do you establish objective morality? I think we've established that both our sides want to establish this. We want to prove that there is an objective morality. And your example was in human flourishing, that is sort of our moral compass, that we should value human flourishing. Not just maybe just the flourishing of ourselves, but of the whole race. And in the rebuttal, you mentioned that, for example, the Nazi example that I stated, that would detract from human flourishing. Well, you get that, but I guess there's a couple of angles that go at this, but I still want to know why. Should we value human flourishing? Why should I not even just value my own flourishing? I'm sure that there is a possible world in which I could live as a dictator and not value anybody else's human flourishing, and I would flourish fine. Maybe other people wouldn't, but why should I value anyone else's human flourishing? What establishes that?
Well, there's two things. One is, questioning why should one want to flourish or whatever is absurd. I mean, everyone wants to flourish. Everyone wants to be happy. But more particularly, the reason why someone would be interested in the flourishing of other people is because it benefits them. Living in a society in which there's other people who are also happy, who I can interact with, etc., is a strong value for people. We are sort of innately or whatever, biologically social, right? We need other people to be around us, and economics tells us living in society and trading with other people will make us better off. We'll be able to be better able to achieve whatever aims we set ourselves if we can cooperate with other people and if there are other people who can be of value to us. So I would say that is why I would be interested in the flourishing of other people.
So I guess I wonder then, first of all, is it not possible that someone can not care for other people's flourishing, just their own, and flourish themselves? What would you say to that person?
We wouldn't like that. No, but that's a good answer. I People won't want to be your friend. People won't hang out with you. You won't be able to get hired by things because your boss will hate you, etc. Right? I mean, the reason why you would want to be sort of a nice person, right, is because that makes other people like you. I mean, if you're just going to steal from me, then I will hate you, right? And I'll do whatever I can to stop you from doing that in the future. So, I mean, if you want to be able to not be basically at war with everyone else all the time, you should probably try to cooperate with people.
We're going to try to keep the questions moving, so y'all's turn to ask a question.
So, yes, never a problem. You guys have established the point that the reason we have a standard for good is because we're doing what God tells you is good. And as you mentioned in your defense of the Old Testament, what God says is not necessarily good by our standards, but because God says it, we're doing what he says. So based off that assumption, if God told you to kill your son, would you do it?
Simple answer, yes. Yes, because listen to, it says not only that Abraham wanted to kill his son, but also that he had faith in God, that God was able to raise him from the dead. And that was his motivation, or that was his rationale. He believed in God's character, that God was so good that God would even raise his own son from the dead if he were to do that.
Well, right, but you're using a different set of morality than God telling you to judge whether or not God is good then, right? So you're saying that it's okay that God told him to kill his son because even if he did, he would bring him up, and so he would ultimately be still alive, and that would be a good thing. Whereas by your moral system, the way that it should work is that it was good for him to kill his son regardless of anything else because God told him to kill his son.
Well, one thing, you said if God told me to kill my son, you're implying, a message of some sort. Like if I got an email from someone called God that said kill your son, I wouldn't kill him. But if like a voice came from the sky, either it's God or I'm crazy, but in either one I'm probably going to kill my son because the voice from the sky told me to.
Okay, in that instance, what of the, I'm sure people who keep up with the news have heard of, there have been several, especially lately, there's a woman, Josh, help me out with the name.
Andrea Yates.
Yes, who drowned her 5 children in a bathtub, claiming God told her to. And upon further investigation, she was told that she heard a voice of God telling her that her children were going to go to hell if she didn't kill them now. And she killed them. These days, we see that as mentally insane. And it's easier to judge her as an immoral person for killing her child, and her children, in fact, 5 of them, in a bathtub because she diminished human fortune. Well, by your standpoint, would that not be considered just as good a reason?
One second.
As soon as you answer, please take your card and ask the question.
I did.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I don't know if I'd answer it quite the same way they did, but if you're talking about being told something by God, like hearing a voice from the sky, you don't act upon only that alone. You would have to have proof. It'd have to be consistent with who God is, first of all. And second of all, you wouldn't do it in a vacuum because people, as you were pointing out very aptly, have all these subjective experiences which are it's easy to believe in false narratives. We can all agree on that. And I think that we do things that are convenient and useful to us and sometimes neurotic. And so I think that one should be extremely careful about doing anything crazy sounding based upon even a belief that that God told us to. I think it has to be validated by community and by other kinds of things. Now, I would like to point out and make an important point that
there are two kinds of situations. There are situations where God does things which you say are mysterious, your words, and that are morally unseemly to us, or that is, we would not justify them if we had carried them out or had ordered them. Well, first of all, we're not on the same level as God, but I'm not getting into that. But the other point is God does not tell people to do things that are inconsistent with his nature. And so there are certain things that God cannot do, and one of those things is to contradict himself. And so you can come up with lots of hypothetical, what if God told you to do X? Well, certain X's do not exist in the set of possible things that God could say, because God cannot contradict his nature by definition of who he is. And so that's just a simple point. Some of these examples, these anecdotes, are only so useful.
Oh, well, yeah, and I guess I was completely going to agree. And we don't have an example of God actually making somebody implement that. Now, I know that they may be referring to the story of Abraham, in which God tells Abraham to kill his son. And Abraham struggles with it, but ultimately is willing. However, God never actually makes him carry it out. And so I would say the question of what if God told you to kill your son is really, essentially, implicitly saying, what if God told you to do evil? It's almost the same thing as saying, what about a square circle? It's just two completely different things that are completely inconceivable together.
Your turn to ask a question.
I have a very brief comment.
So we're all familiar with maybe some of the statistics and things, and correlation is not causation. So human flourishing is the definition then of objective morality, right? Yeah. But couldn't you also look at a different way? That by being rooted in the harmonious and perfect nature, in other words, being connected to the morality of God, that objective morality, we flourish because we're connected with the one who has both designed and implemented humanity to flourish. In other words, as Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and life abundantly. He didn't come so that we would all have a bad time, but to rescue us and to give us life. And so I would say that, how do you know that it's hard for me to tease out these things because it seems like, yeah, they're correlated, so it's easy to make those claims. And we also believe it's true too. Human flourishing, moral behavior, they're absolutely connected. But why are they connected? And that's the question. And how are they connected philosophically?
Okay, so let's see. All right, so what I would basically say is that, if you were to say that God promotes human flourishing, I would say, it's unequivocally not the case. If you look at this world, there's all sorts of horrifically bad things that just happen, and God lets them happen, and he can stop it, right? And anyone who is concerned with the flourishing of human beings would not allow these things to happen. The only way that you can probably get around this would be to posit the existence of some afterlife, as obviously Christians do, and then say, that well, if you are a good person or whatever, you're a Christian, etc., you'll be able to go to heaven and you'll flourish forever, right? And the reason that we call God good, for example, is because the people who obey his commands are rewarded with flourishing, in the hereafter. But there's no reason to think that if you don't think that human flourishing is good independently of whatever God commands, then there's no contradiction in saying that God would say, well, yeah, being a Christian's great, and you should be a moral person, follow these commands, and if you do so, then you'll be able to be with me in heaven, and there you'll suffer unendurable agony or whatever for eternity. And we would call that, no sane person would say that that was just, no sane person would say that was good, right? It'd be horrifically evil. But you can't say God couldn't command that, because without saying that flourishing is good, period, outside, regardless of whatever God commands, God can very well say that suffering is good, and then, there you go. So, I guess I'm done.
So really God, when you guys say that God is good, you're using our system. So so it's almost like God's goodness is actually based on the objective morality of human flourishing.
Oh yeah, and he's just like a force that changes the game plan. What actually makes people flourish.
And the last angle, how we know that this human flourishing idea doesn't come from being similar to God, was the point of pointing out all of the atrocities committed in the Bible, because that's really the only way. You guys most likely believe that it's the Word of God, and that's the only real way we can know His nature. And if we can look at the things He's done and say, well, does that fit with this system that we've determined, that you guys have said is God-given? If it doesn't, then there's a very low likelihood that it's God-given.
That's actually not true.
Sorry, if you guys have a follow-up question, try to keep it brief when you're...
Wasn't that a...
Yeah, no, go ahead. If you want, you can answer it,
okay.
ask us a question.
Yeah, so I'll take that as a question. So I want to make a couple points on that. I mean, first of all, God never sanctions or puts anyone to death who is innocent, ever. Secondly, seriously, secondly, all of God's actions in the Bible could be rationally viewed as moral. The ones that you claim are immoral. Okay. It is not always evil to kill someone if it is for the purpose of protecting what is good. And God says over and over and over and over again in the Bible that the reason why He sanctions, for instance, the slaughtering of nations who hate Him and hate His people and worship other gods and sacrifice their children to idols and all this other stuff, that He sanctions wiping them out in that context because He's eradicating evil, not because He's eradicating good. And that to say that God is wrong to prevent more evil, we don't know what history would look like otherwise, but God does. And so it is perfectly legitimate. If I want to protect my family from an evil perpetrator robbing my house, if I want to pull out a weapon in order to prevent them from killing me and my family, now I'm perfectly within my rights to do that. It's not morally wrong for me to commit to kill someone. And in that instance, and I think every instance, God is not doing evil out of His caprice at all. And in fact, the Bible is filled overwhelmingly with statements of God, defending the helpless, defending the poor. He has a heart for orphans and widows. This is the heart of the Bible. And so to only talk about the things that are Him defending and protecting life, and never talk about all the good things and the merciful thing God does in the Bible is really a misrepresentation of the Bible, period. And so I think that it's a little unfair.
I mean, would you say that...
So we'll have a conclusion very brief because we're over time.
So what I would say is God is all-powerful, all-intelligent, the smartest being ever in existence. But you say that He eradicated evil with His actions in Egypt, so to say. He killed infants. And not only did He kill them, he gave the Pharaoh was considering letting the Israelites go without this happening. And then He forced the Pharaoh to not let them go. And then, because the Pharaoh didn't let them go, He then killed children. I don't know how you could possibly rationalize that as God being good, or like you couldn't know what history would be besides that. I'm sure that God could have found a better way. If He's willing to harden someone's heart and make them commit evil, then surely He could make them not commit evil. So why doesn't He just do that?
Sorry.
20 minutes.
It is. So time for the cross-examination period is now up. Panels will again have 1 minute to confer before making their concluding statements. That 1 minute begins now.
I thank you for Freethinkers for coming and giving thoughtful things to say. And I think I have a lot in common with people who love the intellect and also wear bow ties. So anyway, I was pointing out from the panel that when it comes to the idea that God is bad, and why does he allow such evil in this world? Evil is in us, in every person. Every person has a capacity for it, and we are the ones who try and judge it among ourselves. We have a limited capacity, and if we wanted to stop all evil, we could stop all human flourishing. But that, by definition, is against good, right? As you pointed out. So God allows choice. God allows us to exist. He sometimes allows us to perpetrate evil acts, but he promises to redeem. And that's the hope that we have as Christians in fact. And what of an evil society that would be built on flourishing? It's just a quick anecdote. Have you seen the movie Equilibrium with all the guns and stuff?
Yes.
But you have this society, this utopia that's built on removing violence from people's hearts, but it ends up that there's something wrong about it. It is disconnected. And I think we can come up with other anecdotes, but it's not really not the point. The point is, have we really constructed why flourishing in and of itself, apart from anything else, is absolutely the objective basis for good? And I'm not sure that I've gotten to that point yet. I'm willing to hear more, but I haven't quite connected that. I don't understand it yet. But what I do see is that we all carry within us this idea of right and wrong. And you guys agree. And it seems to me that we try and show that, we are more in the right or they are more in the wrong, and look at how wrong your God is. But we believe that this right and wrong exists. And why? It seems to be everywhere. It permeates us. And we also seem to notice that when we are good people, that we live lives that are harmonious, and not just a peace that is the absence of violence, but a peace that goes, I think, beyond just human flourishing. There's a spiritual peace. There's an emotional, relational well-being. I guess you could define it more broadly. I'll let you do that. I won't be unfair. But it seems to me that that comes from the fact that God has designed us to be at one with himself, so that we can flourish and have life abundantly, but it's in a different way than simply maybe just having lots of people around. And finally, one thing that I've considered is when you're talking about objective morality, and we both like to be on board with that, which is great. When I fight for good against evil, I want to know that I'm fighting for good because good is connected with something that is truly and innately good, that it is good at a deeper level. And that when I say that something is evil, it is because it is absolutely ugly. Not relative even to whether or not something flourishes or not, but on a basic emotional, physical, spiritual sense that good really is good, and we can connect with that because it is in harmony with the very heart of God. And evil is against that. It is darkness without light. So these are just some ramblings of various reasons, but what we set out to show tonight was that, that there is an objective morality, and I think we both agree on that. So that under this worldview, this particular worldview, that the connection between that is hard to find. But with God, it's easy to find. And whether or not we disagree on who God is and what he's done, and if it lines up, we agree that there is something to adhere to. And that for us, we believe that's because it's the very nature and being of God that roots objective morality. Anyway, I really thank you all for coming and for listening, and look forward to your questions.
I'm not quite sure how this works.
Boo.
Bring it up further.
Okay, that's good. All right, cool. All right. Okay, so yeah, I definitely want to thank everyone for coming out. I thought that was interesting. I wish the cross-examination was longer. But I guess that's what the questionnaire, Q&A section is for. So I guess I want to bring up a couple of points really quick. First, the example of equilibrium, this movie, whatever, right? In the movie, they destroy all emotions in order to be able to get rid of violence, which is obviously absurd. I mean, if you want people to flourish, flourishing involves human happiness. If people can't be happy or feel joy or sadness or anything, obviously people are not going to be flourishing. So I think that's a little silly. And also, this idea that maybe there's something more, like there's something deeper than flourishing, I think is kind of silly. I mean, if some spiritual thing, right, is like good and makes people like better off, well, then it's related to flourishing, isn't it? I mean, it's included in this idea. I mean, I don't really understand what it would mean for there to be something greater than something that impacts human happiness or something that impacts human life. But I don't really understand what it would mean to have something to be more evil than to like undermine human flourishing at its core. It's kind of inconceivable to me. But I think the most interesting thing, which I didn't get to address in the cross-examination, was this idea that was brought up that people are born in sin, and then evil is in us, etc. So I mean, the Christian worldview basically has man as innately sinful, and under no circumstances can people be like really truly morally good, not by themselves, right? No one lives up to God's standards. Men are innately corrupt, and they can't escape their corruption. Now, I mean, on this view, people have to be considered moral wretches, powerless to fight against their sinful nature, and be a worthy human being. Now, I mean, if I believed that, of course I would think I need a savior. I mean, I could never possibly have self-esteem or self-respect at a fundamental level, independent of some other being, right, who loves me, and then through the fact that this other thing loves me, I can derive self-esteem. I mean, if someone tried to have self-esteem but truly believed that they were still corrupt deep down, then this knowledge would eat away at them like an acid. It would make them weak and willing to accept anything just to make them feel okay about themselves again. Now, this ideology is perfectly designed to turn men into chattel and to make people willingly accept slavery rather than dare try to make it on their own. And it is, as a result, a vicious ideology. And it's also corrupted pretty much all of Western civilization. I mean, it sort of was popularized and perfected by Christianity, but it burst its bounds. This idea that the individual can't be worthy, that they cannot be good, they cannot be enough without submitting themselves to some higher authority, is responsible really for all of the horrors of the 20th century. I mean, communism, for example, has selfishness is evil, and you must submit yourself to the dictatorship of the proletariat. Fascism, you need to submit yourself to the nation or the Volk, depending on what brand you wish to have. Racism, is all about races. Nationalism is about your nation, etc. The rise of communism, fascism, the Holocaust, genocides, wholesale slaughter of millions, all can be laid at the feet of the ideology of self-subjugation, which is perfected and popularized by Christianity. It burdens every man with an unearned guilt, which forces him to acquiesce to the demands of others to the detriment of his happiness, and as such is far bigger than any particular political ideology. It is the greatest lie ever perpetrated upon mankind. Its vision is that man's natural state is weak and powerless, and that to be good, one must grovel in the darkness of a guilt he did not earn, so that he may perhaps one day reach the dim light of hope for which all these types of ideologies provide. But what's worse is that this person believes that, his eyes are accustomed to this pitch blackness of guilt and sadness. He believes that this dim light of hope is actually the brightest thing that could possibly be. Nothing could exceed its brilliance. And I reject this view entirely. I mean, if man would crawl out of his cave
he would see that he can stand tall and proud in the sunlight, knowing that he deserves happiness, and look upon a world filled with boundless possibility, waiting to be unlocked by the power of the human mind. Christianity thinks men are weak and should grovel, and we believe men are strong and should stand tall. You can be a good person even if you make mistakes, even if you do evil things, and you can earn forgiveness and have self-respect. That is the antithesis of the Christian message, and it is one of the reasons why we cannot possibly take seriously their claim to moral truth. Christianity, together with morality of self-subjugation to a higher authority, which it spawned, and all of that morality's offshoots and variants, is viciously opposed to self-esteem and self-respect, and is, therefore, the most dire enemy of human flourishing that has ever existed. Morality didn't come from God. Evil did.